The war in Ukraine, soaring energy prices and rising raw material costs have underlined the urgency to transition away from our reliance on fossil fuels and accelerate towards cleaner and more affordable energies. But in the short term, will this scramble for alternative energy sources set back the transition to renewables?
We see the war in Ukraine. It is impacting the whole world. The impact on food, on finance, on energy is beyond the neighborhood of the war in Ukraine. Is global.
The cost of living is rising sharply. Food prices are at the highest levels ever recorded, up 34% from this time last year. This crisis has created an additional impetus to move to a future free of fossil fuels, which climate experts hope will accelerate the transition towards renewable energy.
I do think that this should be the accelerant that was needed to get the transition moving more quickly.
But there is a concern that as nations seek to move away from Russian oil and gas, an expanded role for fossil fuels could push the 1.5-degree Paris Agreement goal out of reach. The new IPCC report makes clear that it's now or never to avoid climate catastrophe. The report argues that to stay under 1.5 degrees, carbon emissions from everything that we do, buy, use or eat must peak by 2025. According to the IEA, most of the emission reductions between now and 2030 will come from technologies readily available today.
Technologies that are on the drawing board in the research institutes way too late. We've got to use technologies that are existing today that are ready to be deployed at scale.
Harnessing energy-efficient digital solutions could account for up to 40% of the emission reductions needed by 2040. However, this ambitious target will require a collective effort between governments, industry, business and investors to decarbonize the world's $100 trillion economy.
If you want to transform systems, you're going to need everybody, whether it's the politicians, the youth, the business, capital markets. So everybody needs to now step in.
Amid this environment, how do governments, businesses and citizens work together to ensure that targets are met and net zero ambitions are achieved? Will the backdrop of rising energy, fuel and food prices help or hinder the transition to clean energy? Welcome to CNBC's IoT, Powering the Digital Economy debate, as we focus on the cost of living and the energy future.
Well, there you go. As if by magic, 2 seats have turned into 5 as well. And I just remind our panel, this is being live streamed as well. So we have a very large online audience as well. Look, we have an excellent panel as well. And I literally sat there in the green room and I didn't have an order. I don't have an order. I'm just going to listen to what people say. And then we'll just draw upon that as well. But let me just tell you, we have Maria Mendeluce sitting next to me here. She is the CEO of We Mean Business Coalition as well. Enormous experience in galvanizing not-for-profit organizations and for businesses as well to just get their act together and working out ways that they can move forward together on the energy transition as well. Who have we got next? It's Dr. Patrick Ullman-Ward, who is the CEO of Dana Gas as well. Dana Gas is in the hydrocarbon business. So it's fantastic we've got here to talk about, well, what a hydrocarbon business is doing. Private company, big one based in the Middle East as well, work in all kinds of places, including Kurdish Iraq as well, and indeed the UAE. Who's next to you? Oh, we've got Dickon Pinner, who is the senior partner at McKinsey. You basically Mr. Sustainable at McKinsey, yeah? Something like that? Leading the global practice there. Lots of questions for McKinsey as ever, because McKinsey knows everything apparently. Or is that right? They have a lot of solutions anyway. And Andrea Illy, Dr. Andrea Illy as well. Not only is he the chairman of Illy Cafe, he's also a trained chemist, an environmental expert, and an innovator as well. So thank you very much indeed. 2 doctors, just in case this gets a bit heated on the panel, although I'm not sure if you're medical doctors. Maria, may I start off with you as well? I think we have a challenge. I think I hear what Luc Ramon was saying and what a lot of other people are saying is this will turbocharge the transition, these higher prices. But I have my questions, I have my doubts about here and now as well. Tell me how the scale of the problem that businesses are failing now that we have these multiple of crises, a confluence of calamities, as the MD of the IMF said to my colleague Jeff Cutmore yesterday.
I think you're completely right. I think we are at the crossroads. And one could think that because of the energy crisis, it makes sense to invest in fossil fuels. But it's rather the opposite. Now gas is 4 times more expensive than solar or wind. And so, as the previous speaker said, it makes all the sense to transition and accelerate that transition. There are around 1,000 companies that have sent multiple letters to Europe, to the US, to Japan, asking policymakers to accelerate this transition because 1.5 is pretty much dead unless we accelerate the transition. So clean energy gives energy security, it gives jobs, a healthy environment, and it is cost competitive. So it is now or never. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're going to invest, you'd rather invest in renewables than not in an asset that might become stranded pretty soon.
Look, I know I said I'd go through the panel first, but I'm going to ask you a follow-up question on this one. I always hear it's now or never. I heard it when I was at Le Bourget for COP21. I heard it when I was in Glasgow for COP26. I've heard this is the decade. What have we had? We're in the third year of the decade. Are we on track?
No, but we have good signs to be on track. So there are 7,000 companies that have committed to set science-based targets. This is to be net zero by 2050. 4,200 are SMEs, 3,000 are large companies, which have a lot of companies in their supply chains that also need to transition. So we're going to see how those commitments are going to accelerate into action, and we're listening it now in Davos. Tomorrow there will be a big announcement from the First Mover Coalition of many companies that are committing to buy technologies, products and services that today are not competitive, but by putting that demand forward, they hope that they can incentivize the investment on the technologies that are needed.
Create the scale, create the ecosystem,
exactly.
And they will come as well. Dick and I've got a secret, and I'm going to tell the audiences. There are three of the most important men in the sales of MBC in the audience as well. And a couple of years ago, I spoke to them and I said, look, you're not going to be able to move for companies wanting to get involved in sustainability as well. And that was the case in 2020. It was the case up to COP26. Is it still the case now?
I think very much so. At least if we look at our own sort of activity and discussions with companies and clients, the activity actually just increases, and it's across all sectors. And I think, given the situation we have now, the commitments that companies and financial institutions have made are not going away. So those still stand. I think but we just got to reflect now that we are in a much more challenging situation than we were perhaps a year ago. But I think we should also reflect on the fact that pre the war in Ukraine, we had a highly inflationary scenario already.
Absolutely.
Coming out of COVID, we had a structural shift from services to capital goods. We'd had a lot of fiscal stimulus, and we'd had underinvestment in supply chains, particularly fossil supply chains had been underinvested in. And so most commodities were at 10-year highs going into this situation. So, I think the challenge now is we have probably the most concentrated supply-side shock across everything that you could imagine. It's food, it's agriculture, it's oil, coal, natural gas, pig iron, iron pellets, potash, palladium, nickel, cobalt. That's the challenge. And so we're kind of long demand but short supply of everything, including the installed base.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're working through right now.
Yeah, I think it's something that, and Andre, I'm going to save you to last now because Dickon said so. I knew this would happen. Every time someone says something, I go off elsewhere. So I'm like one of those old Ronnie Corbett stories, I don't know if anyone remembers, where he never actually gets to the end of the story. He just diverges the whole time. You'll remember that, Patrick. You're of a vintage like me. But that's true, isn't it? The whole industries were told to decarbonise. The hydrocarbons were said, well, we don't want you to reinvest. We saw it stateside in the shale as well. And I had a row with Jennifer Granholm at COP26 about this. And she said, because of COVID. I'm like, no, Secretary, it is before COVID that the US wasn't investing enough as well. So we haven't invested enough in hydrocarbons. Has that exacerbated the problem?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, as Dickon said, the high gas prices in Europe started in quarter 3, quarter 4 of last year, before the Ukraine-Russian war. And the causes for it were primarily underinvestment, combined with policy changes around short-term spot market pricing versus long-term contracts for gas. So a combination of elements which resulted, and frankly, a global shortage of gas because of underinvestment. Europe's supply of gas is decreasing because there's underinvestment for exploration for gas in Europe. That meant that they had to import more from elsewhere. the default go-to place was Russia. So in fact, Europe's dependence on Russia over the last 5 years has gone up from 30 to 40%, 5 to 10 years. So, 2020 vision with hindsight, we would like to do things differently now, but as you can imagine, I'm a firm believer in gas as a transition fuel.
Yep.
And the combination particularly of gas together with renewable energy to solve the intermittency problem. Because yes, we have to go with renewables as fast as we possibly can in order to achieve our net zero objectives, but wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. So we have to solve that intermittency problem.
We'll come back to that because I know that Maria will almost certainly be champing at the bit on this conversation. Some of the gentlemen I've spoken to this morning, including the CEOs of Iberdrola and Enel, would be champing at the bit there as well. But we can come to that. And if there is a clean alternative for gas as well, we'll come to that in a short while. Andrea, I've saved you till last as well. I mean this, you are truly inspirational what you're trying to do at Illy Cafe as well, and what you mean with your ecosystem as well. Actually, I'm just very happy to let you just tell us a little bit about the Illy Cafe story, and it's a 30-year odyssey already, isn't it?
Yeah, so the Illy Cafe was 90 years old next year. But what is really interesting for this audience is the recent study about virtuous agriculture, because when we decided to set our goal to be carbon-free, we said we are not going to offset. We want to inset within our own value chain, because we grow land, soil, and also vegetation. This sequestrate carbon. So the model is a virtuous agriculture, which means regenerative for the environment and beneficial for human health. And the secret is enriching soil with organic carbon, and which nourishes the soil biodiversity, fertility. And this makes also the product healthier, because you have less, let's say, agrochemical residues, because a healthier soil requires less defensive agents, less agrochemistry, is more fertile, so less residues. But also, these microorganisms in the soil, they produce many, many different phytochemicals, which are then present in our food, or coffee, whatever, if it is a seed, which could be beneficial for our health, either because they are antioxidant or anti-inflammatory, good for health. So we are trying to demonstrate both things at the same time. So we now got 2 experimental plantations, one in Ethiopia, one in Guatemala, born to be regenerative. We are testing any kind of possible agronomical practices, and as far as we generate new knowledge, then we transfer it to the rest of our growers community, our Circolo Illy, as it is named, through our University of Coffee. And I'm so excited because I've just come back from Brazil. I visited many regenerative farms, already certified regenerative farms, and it's so positive. And I also start seeing the results. So first, chemical analysis about how this, let's say, phytochemicals move dependently in a positive way, higher concentration, dependently on how we grow. So this is the idea we are pursuing. And of course, this is only scope 3. But scope 3 is the most important, because 2/3 of the emissions are scope 3 for agricultural product. Scope 2, circularity, scope 2, we are already sourcing only renewable energy. We have a lot of power, regenerative power in Italy, so we can source. But we also have one very large power plant, solar plant in our factory. And as far as scope 1 is concerned, circularity, only using renewable material for our packaging, like metal that can be infinitely recycled. This is our program in a nutshell.
And it sounds absolutely amazing as well. Now, this is the point where I just remind you as well that people have probably already heard enough of me, actually, to be honest. So if you want to get involved, just give me the nod and just take the conversation where you want to take it as well. As long as we stay in the thematic of the cost of living and the energy future, I'm roughly okay after that. So before I bring Maria in, I know Maria's going to come in on this one as well. The other thing that you didn't mention is that you have a quality product. And if you did mention it, I missed that bit. But it is a quality product as well. And you're bringing in innovation as well. And you're using organic practices as well, which is just fantastic. But is it expensive? Is it adding to the cost of living problem?
No, it is not expensive. The reason why in Brazil now most of the coffee growers are quickly shifting toward regenerative agriculture is because the cost of fertilizer is too high. So by internally producing in their farm compost and enriching soil with this organic matter, they have a significant saving. And they also figure out that instead of putting only organic at the beginning, they can have a smooth transition from the conventional agriculture paradigm, which uses a lot of mineral fertilizers. And instead of simply abandoning mineral fertilizer for organic, they make a gradual shift. So they start enriching soil with organic, and they give less mineral, and they keep also increasing productivity. But the more they do so, the less they need the mineral fertilizers. This is really brilliant. And they are very happy because you get more value for the product. You also have a reputational premium with the quality you do because it's sustainable.
Brilliant. Maria, you're going to come in, and then Dickon after that.
Yes. So last year we gathered 1,000 companies to send a letter to the G20 asking, for some elemental policy ask that will help them achieve their SBTIs. And they say, well, let's phase out coal by 2030 in developed countries, 2040 developing countries. I get your point, that maybe now the market will demand more gas. But when I speak to companies that are now dependent and have a high risk in gas, they're looking at ways to shift it. Maybe they can't do it in the short term, but they know that they're going to do it in the midterm. When I talk to people in the street, like my mother, she wants to put solar panels in her roof, and she's not in this world, right? So I think, I think renewables are a competitive source of energy, and it is just a matter of speed on how we can deploy them. So if I was to invest, I would be very careful not to invest in infrastructure that will become...
It's a view echoed by Dr. Fatih Birol, who's talked about new products and trillions of dollars. And I spoke to Fatih yesterday, actually, just dropping a few more names into it, about these very issues. Patrick, I need to give you a right to reply to Maria, and then I'm going to bring Dickon after that.
So there's absolutely no question. We need to do as much renewables as fast and as quickly as possible. I mean, that's a given. But we do not have a solution for intermittency right now. And the cheapest solution for intermittency is still, despite the high gas prices, is gas or coal. So you have the choice. You can use coal if you want to, but that's obviously going exactly the opposite direction to the direction we wanted to move in. If you just put renewable energy in place, you reduce and replace coal-powered fire stations with renewable energy, you reduce the CO2 output by between 25 and 40%. Why? Because that's the uptime of the renewable energy. If you combine it with combined cycle gas turbines, you're reducing the CO2 footprint by 80%, because gas has got half the CO2 content than coal does. So that's a much better outcome. And ultimately, of course, you can decarbonize the gas because you can collect the flue gases, the CO2, and you can sequester that. And ultimately, of course, you would migrate, hopefully in the future, to green hydrogen.
I get that, and I will bring you in a second, Dickon, but when I've got an industry that, quite frankly, still flares, still has a methane problem, and hasn't moved ahead necessarily with the technology to decarbonize gas as quickly as I would have hoped it would have done as well, there are still multiple challenges which still make it not as clean as it could be.
I absolutely agree. The industry really needs to get its act together.
But I've heard that for
at
least a decade.
And it is. No, but it is getting its act together. I mean, the OGCI, which is the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, is putting a lot of emphasis and money, billions of dollars, into this. Fugitive emissions are going down. I mean, in our particular case, for example, in our operations in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, our footprint, our CO2 footprint is 8 kilograms per barrel of oil equivalent, which is kind of top decile. Industry average is over 20. We have taken initiatives to drive that down even further. We have signed up to the World Bank no flaring policy. And in fact, last year, we had managed to reduce our emissions so much that we actually bought carbon offsets, and we became actually net carbon last year in our operations.
Right.
So that's absolutely a focus for the future. We have to keep on driving down our operational emissions.
Did you want one more go?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned Fatih Birol, and I heard him yesterday. So the IEA has clearly said that we don't need to build more infrastructure on oil and gas, that what we have, it's enough. together with.
What about an arbiter on this one as well? And in fact, Dick and I know that you're somewhere in between because you think actually the catalyst now is for short-term investment in hydrocarbons, but longer-term for renewables as well. So, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Just tell us what you want to say.
I mean, maybe 2 points. I think just anchoring on the cost of the transition, of an orderly transition, pre the inflationary environment, pre the kind of crisis and the war in Ukraine. I mean, we did some work recently that showed, about $5.7 trillion today are spent on land and energy systems worldwide. About $6 trillion. That number needs to increase to about $9 trillion a year. It's about $275 trillion over the next 30 years. And the mix shift needs to go from about 2/3 high carbon assets to 2/3 low carbon assets. So that's, if you like, scaling up the spend today on low carbon from about 2 trillion to 6 trillion over that period. The challenge is, this is, I think, as Luke mentioned earlier, a switch out of fuel that comes out of the ground in one form or another with a machine. And it is a switch out of OPEX for CAPEX. It's very front-loaded. It's an infrastructure investment, needs a lot of financing. So here's just some facts, right? We spend 6.8% of GDP today on energy and land use systems. That number by the end of the decade would need to rise to about 8.8% because it's front-loaded, and then the average would be about 7.5% over the 3 decades. It is also very uneven, right? So the spend, that investment level for the US, China, Japan, and Europe is about 6%. If you go to India and India and the Middle East, it kind of pops up to about 16%. If you go to Ukraine and Russia, this is pre the crisis, it goes to about 21%. So there's also a question of how do you get those types of investment levels into non-OECD countries? This was pre-crisis, right? So just sort of giving you, and I think if you now look at, just take the Europe situation, they had a demand-side strategy, $100 a ton, pretty much across the entire economy. But the supply-side strategy, neither on the installed base nor the new stuff was fully in place. And if you curtail the existing supply too quickly and the new supply is not there, you are very vulnerable to volatility and commodity price fly-ups, which will derail the transition. So it's a kind of false dichotomy. You can't have the transition, you can't have sustainability without security. And right now we don't have that security of supply. So in answer to your question, do I think there will be near-term rise on fossil? I think, yes, but not all fossil is equal, right? So I think in Germany, for example, they will burn more coal in their coal plants. The UK will probably revisit the North Sea. This is extending the lifetime of existing fossil assets. Then you've got oil, but all oil is not the same. The oil in the Middle East and the oil in the Permian is lower cost and low carbon intensity than elsewhere. And it's also a very short life cycle. It's got very high depletion rates. Gas is a very interesting one, very important role in the transition. Of course, if you put LNG terminals in various places, that is 40 to 50-year economic lock-in, unless you have, guarantees from the government or et cetera to curtail that in some way. So yes, we do think near term there will be increased spend. I mean, there has to be. I mean, look, Germany has a gas gap of 1/3 that it literally cannot fill, right? So for the next couple of years, it's going to be about efficiency, and they will have to import gas and burn more coal in the near term. Now, that said, these higher prices, as has been mentioned, will shift the break-even economics of newer technologies, most of which are quite ready to deploy at scale. So that's why we're kind of optimistic in the medium to long run with this realization that, we've got a big challenge ahead of us, and we haven't even talked about food. But,
the good news is I have a panel at 5:30 p.m. for the World Economic Forum on food systems, if anyone wants to get involved in that one as well. So that's later. But Andrea, I do want to come to you on this one as well, because you've heard a very spirited conversation already through 3 great experts. We're coming from different points of view, which is just perfect, which is why it's a well put together panel as well. But Andrea, you can look at this because one thing you're trying to do is look at what you're doing, look what you're doing with your ecosystem, and actually seeing whether you can actually expand this, whether there are thematics that you are visiting in the world that you're inhabiting that actually can expand into other areas as well. Is there anything you've heard on this purely energy debate, which is mostly so far concentrated on the role of gas going forward, or actually do we need to not spend on gas as a transmission fuel? Is there anything you can say for the energy sector that this is just so obvious, we need to do this?
Yes. We are talking about the energy transition, but it is only it is a prerequisite of a much bigger transition, which is the ecological one, which also requires the already mentioned agroecological transition in all agriculture and products from the biosphere, natural products. And we also need another industrial, let's say, transition after the digital one into the circular one, because everything needs to have this transition. So in one word, we need to change our development model, because the present and past extractive model and linear, which keeps depleting natural resources and producing an infinite amount of residues which are polluting and accumulating in the biosphere, eventually suffocating it and preventing the biosphere to self-regenerate. So the idea is we need to shift this model and create a new biomimic model working like nature, using only renewables energy, possibly solar, when biosynthesis feeds a biodecomposition, and these two processes are completely intertwined, feeding each other with no residues and no loss of balance at any moment. This is feasible. It has been possible for nature, perfected in 3.6 billion. We made this great mess in just 150 years, which is nothing, because if you compress these 3.6 billion years in one day, our Anthropocene is only 5 milliseconds. So give me an extra milliseconds and we fix everything by transitioning to this regenerative model. We believe that the most important factors are people's well-being first, because you need people aware that their well-being depends on the world they live to be more responsible, more circular, depleting less resources. 70% of the energy produced in the world is simply wasted. 30% of the food produced is wasted. We consume only 2% of the biomass produced for agriculture. All the rest is waste, and nothing is used in a proper way. You see the immense opportunity we have. So circularity. Circularity in order to detox the biosphere so that it can spontaneously regenerate itself, and conserving the biodiversity, which is responsible for resilience and health of biosystems, including sequestering carbon.
Maria and Dickon are both going to come in on this. I'm going to come to you as well in a moment, Patrick, but Maria.
Well, I think Andrea is right. I don't think we have exploited fully the power of circular economy, also in the industrial systems, right? And I think now it is the right moment to do so. How can we design products and services that use less material, and that wasted material at the end of the use can be reused in the system? That can save a lot of energy, can save a lot of food, and many of the rare materials that are needed also for the transition. And so if you talk to the OEMs, circular economy is front and center on their strategy, because we need to recycle these materials, cobalt, nickel, etc., to be able to provide the batteries for the future.
I mean, just picking up on the theme, maybe a kind of quasi-financial analogy, but in many ways, nature is like the balance sheet of the planet. It provides resilience, and I think there are so many dependencies of the real economy on nature that many companies, governments have not yet fully realized. The interdependence is so great. I do think near term, I think regenerative agriculture, etc., is an amazing practice. I think near term that may actually come under pressure, because it means putting land aside to regenerate. The pressure now on kind of yield maximization on food is going to be very high. There is, I mentioned earlier, a lot of the potash comes out of the Ukraine that actually would go to places like Latin America, the knock-on consequences here. So, but at the same time, I think, various bits of ag tech, precision agriculture, etc., will be accelerated. Anything to do with efficiency is going to get massively accelerated near term. But, and then of course, then there's the food versus fuel thing, which I think we're going to bump into again as well, which actually plays back into the hands of...
Can I react to that?
I'm desperate to get back to Patrick before I forget what I was going to ask him, but you go ahead.
No, I react to that by saying I agree that there is tension in this agroecological transition, because we also need to change our diet. 70% of, let's say, the environmental impact for agriculture, land use, greenhouse gases emission is for, animal proteins, which we consume too many, also for our health point of view.
Yeah.
And we have a diet which is completely crazy, because although there are thousands of plants that we could feed us, we only use 12 plants for 80% of the calories that we consume. So we would need to, and this is a very good, let's say, study which has been done by the Eat Lancet Commission 3 years ago, and they concluded less animal proteins, more plant-based diet. You don't need to become, as you say, vegan or vegetarian. Just reduce and reallocate to more different producers, and finding substitute to wheat, substitute to maize, substitute to rice, and also for better health. This will substantially contribute to biodiversity and also to food security, because food security nowadays is endangered by climate change, because it has been now 10 years that the productivity is always more and more compromised by climate change.
I know this is great, because everyone's got, and I too, champing at the bit here, but I do want to come back to Patrick on about 3 points ago, because I do want to give you a chance to say, look, and also just point out, we're talking about the West in many ways. It's the Western diet which is so absolutely appalling. I've done a lot of work on this over the last few years as well. And I hear what you're saying about the land usage and how we spend so much time draining the oceans and cutting down the rainforests for food for animals so that we can eat those animals, and it's just so inefficient in many ways. And I'll be speaking to that with the governor of Para, which is the largest state in which has had deforestation over the last 20 years, in about 2 hours' time. But Patrick, the biomimic model, I love that line, the biomimic model as well. It's fine for many, it's fine for the West in many ways, but there are communities out there who just want to heat their homes. There are communities who just want to be able to feed themselves as well. And I know that your company is doing a lot of work for communities that don't have the same luxury as the world. And it's an argument, the Western world, it's an argument I've heard time and time again, just let us industrialize. We hear it from India, we hear it from a lot of countries. And I have an enormous empathy for those people saying that after, as you say, 150, 200 years of Western industrialization. So Dana and others are doing a lot of work for remote communities as well, who just don't have a choice.
Yeah. So, and I think the climate debate seen from the developing world is a rather self-centered and rich world discussion. So obviously the whole business around a fair transition is absolutely central to this whole the success of the planet moving from where we are today to where we need to be. Where we work in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, there is power supply 80% of the time. There's sufficient power generatives, but because of underinvestment, there's not enough gas produced. We have huge volumes of gas that we can produce. So it is a question, it was a political question, and it's one that's being resolved. So the first point I wanted to make is that since we started delivering gas for power generation in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, their supply of electricity has gone from 20% to 80%. What they were using before was heavy fuel oil and diesel to generate the power. We have, by substituting gas, we have taken out 40 million tons of CO2 from their energy production, which is more CO2 savings than every single electric vehicle on the planet to date. So it's important that these communities get the power needs that they are entitled to, frankly. And I think there's a great example of decarbonizing that and making a positive contribution in that process. We are also working with communities around our infrastructure where we actually produce the gas. We are providing them with power from our power generating plants, but we want to move away from that, and we want to go to disseminated energy systems, whereby with a combination of solar PV, batteries, and LPG power generation, we can provide persistent energy for remote communities which are not and cannot be connected up to the grid.
Maria, you want to comment on this?
Well, I think this is a great example. There are 800 million people that don't have access to energy. And so I think it's great, the work that you're doing, and I think these microgrids should be deployed around the world. Of course, am I going to say renewables offer a fantastic distributed solution to give access to energy, not all the time, but much more than what they have now. And yes, we need some reliability, which the combined solution that you have offers. And then we need to see how we transition fully when the time comes that we have a storage technology for these countries. Let's deploy it, but let's not go with very expensive technologies, obviously, to developing countries. Because
but there you go again. As soon as you say a word, I'm getting excited. Expensive technologies. All technologies start off expensive. My parents in, I don't know, 1984 got their microwave. It was about £800. You can pick one up for £50 now. So
let me clarify.
All technologies start off expensive.
The battery. What I mean is that we should not offer them solar PV, but with a very expensive battery system that's,
But that's got me thinking about scale, and perhaps as one of these solutions for cost of living. But Dr. Illy, you want to come in, and then Dick and I.
Yeah, I was wondering about biogas, which you can do by digesting all this enormous biomass, which is left over from agriculture. How big is the opportunity to get access to these 800 people without energy? Is it just a question of helping them get producing biogas? Because biogas, then you also have residues to put on the field and enriching the soil. You have this synergy, this technology, which I don't know, it's called BECCS, something like that. What do you think about that?
Well, I think one of the problems, if I may just jump in there, is that many of the communities that are lacking access to power tend to be in Africa, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa, and there all the biomass is burnt for cooking. So you don't have that luxury of that biomass being redeployed to enrich the soil, which is one of the reasons why the soil continues to degrade, because it's consumed. So if we can provide disseminated energy solutions based around solar PV, because that is an abundant commodity there, then you start having a chance of having residual biomass, which can then
very good.
Have a positive cycle.
Actually, before you come in about what you were going to come in about, did you want to come in on biomass? Because I'm sure you've done your work on that as well. Well, I mean, you were talking about the competition of land use as well, and I actually fully take on board your point about in this moment of food crisis, we're talking about energy, but in this moment of food crisis, which even, I think it was Jane Fraser from Citi on Jeff's panel yesterday on the economic outlook, she said, look, I'm terrified about the ramifications of the food crisis and what it could mean for 1.5 billion people. You mentioned 800 million, 1.5 billion people could be in dire straits because of it. So we talked about the competition for land use as well. Again,
I think that we've done a bit of analysis on trying to look at what the, if you like, the optimal use for the marginal ton of biomass is.
Yep.
And I think the challenge with so many of these, if you like, nature-based solutions or renewables, etc., are they're very land intensive, right? So when you hit the scale button on alternative proteins or on biomass energy plus CCS or on storing carbon in forest or the land versus fuel, you hit that scale button to cover billions of people, you do potentially trip into kind of borders that you need to think thoughtfully about how those things scale. But one point, getting back to your, I think one of the things that's prevailing around here is the question of affordability, right? Particularly,
that's because it's a cost of living panel,
right? For the good point, for the global South in particular, but not just contained to the global South. And get back to this theme of OPEX for CAPEX. If CAPEX means that the investment has to go into the region, right? So if we are saying that so much infrastructure of this new green infrastructure will need to be built in non-OECD countries, it also means that there will be a transfer of wealth, but through the form of CAPEX that will bring jobs, etc., with it. And I think, trying to think through that affordability question, how wealth ends up kind of, getting transferred in some form to the global south, and how we have this concept of sustainable, inclusive growth. And our sense is, if it's not inclusive, large groups of people left out, and if the economy is not growing to create surplus, you won't get sustainable transition as well. So I think it's a very complicated puzzle of how to solve the affordability, how to solve the equity, how to solve the sustainability question. I think there's a path, but it takes a
Are we excited about the technology at this level? I mean, I've heard about these amazing technologies, and I hear detractors about the possibilities for green hydrogen, for biofuels, for scalability of storage and what have you. But are we excited about the technological change at the moment? We've got about 6.5 minutes left, so a couple of rounds left on this one. Is the technology where it needs to be now? Some people say, yes, it's there and we don't need to worry about the situation because the technology, but is it in place, or do we actually need a vast amount more money to be invested in the technology?
So I think the clean technology is here. I think the issue is that we don't have the skill, the people trained to deploy it.
So we've got a people problem. There you go again. You've just opened up the conversation to another level.
Exactly, because I think we are thinking technology, renewables is competitive, you can deploy it, but now the challenge we have in Europe is that there are not enough skills.
And we have a wage inflation problem globally building up in large parts of the world. That is a great point.
And, we talk a lot about just transition, but I'm starting to say that this is the opportunity transition, and it is now. And if you have a business and you have a plan to decarbonize, well, parallel to that plan, you need to have a plan on how you're going to reskill your workforce so that when those technologies are in the S-curve, when they are going to accelerate, you have the people to deploy them.
You're so right. I was at a huge energy conference, it was Madrid about 15 years ago, where the head of Schlumberger turned around and said, look at us, all our geologists are in their 50s, they're all men and they're in their 50s as well. The industry's struggled to attract talent as well. We're having a global problem attracting talent at a reasonable price, adding to the cost of the crisis.
Well, I'm an example. I'm a geologist, and I'm in my 60s. So there you are, exactly.
Well, you would have been when that comment was made at Schlumberger.
There we go. No, I mean, our industry, the oil and gas industry, has been very bad at sustaining talent. We've gone through several boom-bust cycles.
Why don't you just call yourself cloud gas or something, or .com gas? You'll have them or crypto gas.
So, and we've been through the last, one of the problems and the reasons why shale gas and shale oil hasn't come back as fast as people had expected, given the high prices, is because everyone got fired in 2014. So people left the industry. So now there's a shortage of manpower in the US oil and gas industry. So we haven't managed that aspect, of the people aspect of our industry particularly well. But in terms of technology, clearly there are things that are here and now, solar PV, wind power. These will go on improving incrementally, but it's there and it's affordable and scalable. We have combined cycle gas turbines. It's there, it's affordable, it's scalable, it's a very small footprint for the same amount of power generation as a renewable system. So where space is a premium, that's clearly going to be a solution. So there are solutions to our problem today, and we tend to make the good the enemy of the perfect. And I think what we really need to do is focus on the technologies we already have that can be scaled and can be used, whilst recognizing there has to be a huge wave of future investment in future technologies to finish the job off.
Technology and talent. You can take both parts of that as well.
Yeah, I think, interestingly, I think we have a project development problem in that the demand signal, if you look at the transition for green stuff, green infrastructure, is actually quite strong. But I think two things are missing. Well, so I think the demand is there. I actually think a lot of the capital is formed and ready to be deployed. And, you know, this Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero would claim that there's, you know, $130 trillion of
Spent
capital.
a lot of time talking to Mark Carney about this.
There you go. I think the two bits that are missing are the market mechanisms to get the capital to the right place, and there's not enough project development. I mean, if you wanted to throw a lot of money to build green ammonia plants or something in certain non-OECD countries, you would struggle to find the developers. So I think there's a project development gap that can be solved. On the technology, there's just 2 points on technology. One, I think 70, 80+% of technologies that we need are viable. They're not all cost competitive now. So there are two issues, right?
Even at $113 a barrel as we speak now.
Yeah. I mean, you know, green steel still has a premium. Now the technology works, but it's not yet at the right cost point, right? So you've got to kind of put the volume out there and create sort of accelerated market commitments to. I think that's coming, but the technology. It's not that we need new stuff coming out of the lab. We need to mature it and deploy that which is already economic, and mature and get down the cost curve of stuff that still needs a bit of hand-holding.
Can I give you so solar PV, the price decreased 85% in the last decade, 10 years.
And it's completely economic. Totally get it.
Completely. Now, First Mover Coalition, there is a program in Sweden, Hybrid it's called, and they managed to produce zero-emission steel, zero-emission steel, and which meant that normally zero-emission steel was going to be available in the market in 2043. So now, thanks to this deployment, now it's going to be available in the market in 2034, a decade. So I think when there is a demand, I think the companies figure out a way to deliver on what the client wants, right?
Right, 1 minute to go. Let's have one more round. The biggest barrier or the most exciting development that's going to get us to where we need to get in this absolutely key decade? The biggest barrier, given this cost of living crisis and our move to energy transition, the biggest barrier or the most exciting development that you think we're going to see or we're seeing at the moment? Andrea, what
Well, barrier, I see there is still a big problem with regulations in order to make this investment fast enough to get the authorization and so forth. And also in measuring. Measuring is still much behind in terms of all KPIs. So this is what I see.
Dickon?
I'd say that sort of for optimism, there's so much value creation potential at stake here, and so much innovation in the works that gives me cause for optimism if we invest in both sides of the ledger, security of supply and the transition, to make sure that you cut out the volatility and commodity price fly-ups that are very problematic to deal with.
Patrick?
I think the realization there is no silver bullet. We need all hands to the pump and a variety of solutions, and that we need to make sure that the good is not made the enemy of the perfect.
And the final word from Maria.
So I think we have thousands of companies that are committed to climate change, which is the biggest existential crisis that we face these days. So we need to get to the millions, and for that we need more regulations.
There are so many highlights of this panel. I started off with a few notes and it's just gone everywhere as well. I'll just take a couple of points. Green solutions don't have to be more expensive. Momentum will happen regardless of the cycle and underlying prices. It's so important about intermittency. It's a problem. Gas, there is a lot of contention about that still from this panel as well. Trillions need to be spent as well. I love the line about the biomimicking model as well, Andrea. That was great. But I also love the line from Dickon about nature is the balance sheet of the planet. Shall I just leave it at that? Yeah. Nature, ladies and gentlemen, is the balance sheet of the planet. Can we thank this terrific panel? Let me just say in no particular order. And Dr. Andrea Illy, Maria Mendeluce. We have Dr. Patrick Allman-Ward and Dickon Pinner as well. Thank you all very much indeed.